Hey there, guys. Welcome back to another week of Cyber US History. So, this past week, you looked at a brief video on Vietnam and the beginnings of Vietnam. That's what we're going to continue to look at this week and really diving into the causes of it, the ins and outs of the war itself, and the outcomes. When we look at the war in Vietnam, up until Afghanistan, it was the longest conflict in US history. Um, the war was drawn out longer than what politicians expected it to be, and it cost more money than they ever expected, and obviously more troops. So when we look at the war itself, we had about 54,000 Americans lose their lives fighting in the jungles of Vietnam, and really it was all over this policy of containment, right? Stopping communism from spreading into South Vietnam. So Ho Chi Minh, the leader of the North Vietnamese, ultimately was asking for independence all the way back to World War One. He wasn't given it. It fights the Japanese alongside the United States in World War Two, and still is not given independence from the French. The French owned what was known as Indochina. It was Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam. And so in 1954, Ho Chi Minh rises up an army and defeats the French to the shock of the world. And so from that point forward, we divided Vietnam into North and South, North being supported by the USSR, the South being supported by the United States, and the North being communist. That moving forward, Eisenhower starts putting in advisors right into Vietnam that are not supposed to be getting into conflict. And Kennedy continues that policy of sending advisors who, by the time Kennedy's in office, are actually fighting on the ground and firing weapons when they weren't supposed to be. They were supposed to be training the South Vietnamese. So we get this further and further, deeper and deeper involved in the Vietnam throughout Eisenhower, Kennedy, and then Johnson and Nixon. The height of Vietnam, we had about 500,000 troops on the ground in 1968. And Nixon then tries to pare that down. Ultimately, in the end, you could argue that in the sense of containment, it was a loss for the United States. The South Vietnamese fall to communism. Ho Chi Minh enters into Saigon, renames it Ho Chi Minh City, and ultimately becomes a communist nation. Today, they are a socialist nation. They are friendly with the United States. But again, there's a lot to this war. Really, the biggest aspect outside of the war itself is the impact here at home. Obviously, we have the anti-war protest movement, and ultimately, it's really over the draft. It's over fighting a war that most Americans couldn't agree with, and it's a credibility gap. It's the first time in history that we see the war in our living room because of TV, right? So the government is telling us that we're winning the war, but yet we see the caskets coming back from Vietnam, and what we're seeing on TV is not matching with what the government is telling us. So we call that this credibility gap. So it leads to waning support for the war in Vietnam, and again, ultimately, the U.S. trying to figure out how to get out of this quagmire of this war. And really, it boils down to Nixon on this Vietnamization policy and trying to pare us down into a war that we couldn't win. So this week, real simple. All you're going to do is look at a slideshow, answer some questions that go with it, just get the gist of what Vietnam was all about. And then next week, we'll kind of take a step back. We'll look at some of the other aspects of Nixon's administration, and really start closing out the rest of the school year looking at more of the modern stuff. As always, guys, any questions, contact me, but I'll see you next week.